I'm going to go ahead and call this Assembly Committee on Housing and Homelessness to order. We are noticed today from 11 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. Let's go ahead and start with introductions. I will just note for the record that Mr. Solt and Ms. Quinn Davidson are excused from the meeting. So we'll go ahead and start with Ms. Dern and go around the table.
Hi, I'm here this morning because I'm very interested to know what's going on and to get caught up to speed. Unfortunately, I have a training, and so I'm going to have to leave in about 40 minutes or so, but I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Kevin Cross.
Christopher Constant.
Felix Rivera. And
Adam Trombley.
Thank you.
Alexis Johnson.
Great, thanks. We'll have other folks introduce themselves as... Thank you. Thank you, Ms. LaFrance. We'll have other folks introduce themselves as they join the table. Okay, so thanks everyone for making the time for this special meeting. I know we met last week, but last week's agenda was over full. So we're going to be circling back to a few items from last week and then finishing up the items that we didn't get to. Normally, today, many of us would be at a fancy luncheon across the street at the Denina at this time. So I respect that some members are there right now, but I appreciate everyone giving that up to attend this important meeting, those who attended today. So before we get started, I wanted to add a couple of things under the... And it sounds like, before I continue, Mr. Constant wants to add something.
Yeah, just note that Mr. Vaughn is here, and for that we have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. Before we get started, I wanted to add a couple of things under the emergency shelter plan under unfinished business that needed additional follow-up. So those two items include the food policy implementation and the ERA2 funds. So we will get to those in a bit. All right, next on our agenda, initial audience participation. We didn't have anyone sign up.
I did want to add one item.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was hoping to add discussion with Duke Russell onto the agenda informally, so maybe that's part of the food policy conversation.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we didn't have anyone sign up for initial audience participation. We will do our best to make time under final audience participation for folks who want to participate in that manner. So next we have unfinished business. The first item we have under the agenda is the emergency shelter plan implementation and demobilization. So first we'll start with the Covenant House as part of the emergency shelter plan. So when we talked about this in December and last week at the committee meeting, it became apparent that the issue at hand is whether we can access 2022 alcohol tax fund balance or not to ensure we can keep this service. So as I understand it, and I hope, there is a positive update for today. So I'll turn to the administration for that.
Through the chair, yes, there is a positive outcome from that conversation. We will be putting an appropriation request forward to the assembly at the next assembly meeting for $4.7 million of 2022 unreconciled alcohol tax. And that is to cover all emergency cold weather shelter through April. I do want to put on the record that we have not planned for October through December as far as funding goes. And so we're going to have that discussion later to see if we have enough funding to cover emergency cold weather shelter October through December.
Thanks. So a couple questions on that. First is, does that 4.7 million, does that balance out the parts of the budget that we're, because I remember when we approved the budget, we approved parts of the Anchorage Health Department, or not the budget, but when we approved the contract amendments, we approved part of the Anchorage Health Department general government operating budget. So does that $4.7 million balance that out?
Through the chair, yes, sir, it does.
Okay, great. And then the second question is, so the $4.7 million is for the Sullivan Arena, for the Alex Hotel, and for Covenant House?
Through the chair, this covers operations at the Sullivan Arena, operations at the Alex, the room rental rate for the Alex Hotel, the Aviator, and the Covenant House.
Okay, great. All right, thank you. So then we will see that as part of the agenda for February 7th, just to confirm.
Through the chair, yes, sir, you will.
Great, thanks. Any other questions on this topic? Okay, thanks. So then next we have the Golden Lion update. So we wanted to hear directly from the administration's lead on this project, which I understand is the Chief of Staff, Mr. Trombley. So Mr. Trombley, I will turn the floor to you.
So I'll address two things: repairs and operations plan. Currently, repairs just to get the building up to necessary code, regardless of whoever would occupy that. You're looking around $700,000 in repairs. That is currently being funded out of the 23 facilities budget. We will be coming forward to the assembly at some point in time in February with an appropriation request. We just have to identify a funding source. I won't get into the details as to all the repairs that are necessary, but one of the large drivers is the fire suppression system needs replacing. And currently that building is under 24-hour fire watch. There was a fire in the Golden Lion probably 6 months ago. One of the heaters caught a curtain on fire. Fortunately, there was some damage, not a tremendous amount of damage, but that just has drawn greater scrutiny into the building itself. So in regards to the operations, and the reason I can't give you a timeline, right? Well, I don't want to say I can't give you a timeline, but in the repairs, there is a timeline for those repairs. But I want you to look at the repairs in regards to an operations plan, because the operations plan, and this could potentially be done faster, but if we were to go through the competitive process to find a contractor to actually operate the location, this is a very complex operation. To give you an example, doing a road design, competitive bid for a road design generally takes 6 to 9 months. By the time you develop an RFP, wait for bids, bid review, questions back and forth with potential winners of the bid, the award and assembly approval, generally that takes 6 to 9 months. And so that's what we're basing our 6 to 9 month timeline on for an operator for something this complex. I do want to mention that Lance Wilbur, Community Development Director, toured the Golden Lion. I don't know if it was last week or earlier this week, Monday or Tuesday, with a member from Rasmussen Foundation. And looking at the building in terms of a rooming house and how that would operate, he gave a tremendous amount of information, a tremendous amount of details. Some of those things, this would be outside of that $700,000. That, again, those $700,000 is just repairs to the location itself. But in regards to operations, and I'm assuming this individual, it's Bob Dole, would be considered somewhat of an expert, being with his position with Rasmussen Foundation, mentioned in regards to an operation, there would need to be improvements to the current kitchen, laundry services, and security upgrades as well. And each of those would draw additional costs. Security upgrades, I don't want to say any numbers because I don't want to be quoted in some capacity with those potentially changing as the security system is further defined. We do think absolutely that the necessary repairs to the building could be done within that 6 to 9 month time frame in the development of the RFP. So those repairs, again, would all be completed. And then as you work with an operator, whoever that operator would be, if it was sole sourced and the assembly wanted to sole source to an operator, that 6 to 9 month time frame could be cut down significantly. It just kind of depends on what you guys want to do as far as time frame goes. But a couple other things that I did want to mention, and again, I'm just kind of regurgitating the information that was presented by Mr. Dole, was in regards to a rooming house, and this is something that the assembly just needs to think about as they move forward with with appropriations. Similar operations that he is familiar with that has anywhere from rooming houses that have anywhere from 100 to 125 rooms are generally operating at a deficit of about $300,000 a year. So that just needs to, I just wanted to put that on the record. The Golden Lion, I believe, has 82 or 85 rooms. So I don't know what the deficit would look like in that situation, assuming that there would be a deficit, depending on how it would operate. There's a lot of moving parts in that, but I just wanted to put that on the record so that you guys are aware of that. And this is not coming from the administration; it's coming from Rasmussen Foundation. In wrapping up, I do want to add that in my conversations with Mr. Wilbur, I said, as the operations plan is developed and as it's being worked on, I said, please ensure that you work closely with the assembly in whatever capacity that looks like, so that the operations plan is not done in a vacuum, that's done in a collaborative fashion. And he ensured that that was going to happen. So you'll probably be hearing more from him. I'm assuming it'd probably be worked through this committee. And that's all, Mr. Chairman.
Great. Thank you so much, Mr. Trombley, for that report. So a few questions. I have myself in the queue, then I have Mr. Constant. If anyone else wants to get in the queue, please let me know. First is, as I understood it from last week, we were initially looking at 4 to 6 months for repairs, but I guess that's no longer the paradigm. Really, we're looking at 6 to 9 months. Is that accurate?
Well, again, I think the repairs themselves would probably take somewhere around that time frame, but the repairs are one thing. Then it's also looking at the operations. So there's two separate things.
Okay.
Yep.
Got it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's good to know then. So we are operating on two different timelines. So then on the 6 to 9 months for the operator, how is that comparable to the work that was done, for example, to open up the guest house?
I'm not familiar with how the guest house operates and how that works. So I'd be a bad example or
Sure.
a bad candidate to explain that. But I do want to say though, that again, that 6 to 9 month time frame, what we're basing that on is more complicated projects that we do, like road design bids. And so that's where we're getting that 6 to 9 months, because that's generally how long it takes there. And we're just assuming that it would be the same here. It could be faster. It's just, we've never done this before. So there's a lot of ifs there.
Yeah, totally understood. I think my point in asking the question is seeing if, we have a recent project that did this. So were they able, what was the timeline there? And if there's any expertise that we could take from that project and hopefully implement it for this project, I think that would be great. So I guess I would invite if there's anyone in the audience who can speak to that.
Good morning, Meg Zalatel, Executive Director of the Anchorage Coalition in Homelessness. The coalition, alongside Rasmussen and the providers, worked to get the guest house up and running. That was approximately a 3-month process from moving through the initial conversations with both the property management and the provider on site through to lease ups. That one was a little bit different because people were already in the building. Excuse me. However, it's been about a similar kind of negotiation and working out the nuts and bolts with regards to the Barrett. That is more delayed because of some additional repairs to the building with regard to snow and roofs.
Okay. Thank you for that. I don't know if other members will have questions for you, but I will. So I have 2 more questions. So first is, so you mentioned 700,000 in repairs, but then later on you also mentioned possible other issues that were brought to you by Mr. Dole. So that 700,000, I assume, is not all encompassing. It might be 700 plus some additional in the future.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, that's correct. And again, those 700,000 is just to get the building ready to be habitated, slept in overnight. That would need to happen regardless of whoever owned it and needed to occupy it.
Okay, thanks. And then my last question is on the timeline. So we have 2 different timelines, 6 to 9 months, 4 to 6 months. So I assume the 4 to 6 months will start when we appropriate the funds. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, respectfully, no, that's not correct. Currently, some of those repairs are actually being worked on right now, and we're utilizing 23's facilities operations budget in order to do that. but that's going to chew into the operation budget pretty heavily. So we will come forward with an appropriation. We're not waiting. In fact, we've already had conversations with development services to ensure that any permits that are required and sign-offs needed for this project are not put on the back burner, and that they make it to the front of the line.
That's good to know. So then could you just give me a rough estimate of when that 4 to 6 months for the repairs, when that started?
I'll have to get back to you because I know that they've been working on it. So
Okay,
I'll
great.
get back with you.
That would be helpful. And then when do you think the 6 to 9 months as it's currently planned for the operations, when would that start? Or has that started already?
I don't think it started based on our conversation yesterday because I want to make sure that it's a collaborative effort with the assembly. So, but again, Mr. Wilbur will probably be reaching out to you in order to do that. So however long you think that would work and whoever else you want involved in that, we'd be happy to oblige.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Constant?
Thanks. So I just want to talk briefly about the consent decree with Providence and the sale of MLP and the requirement to figure out a substance use treatment facility and how this was part of that mix. And I just want to put into your ears a conversation that I've been having now for probably 6 months with a number of professionals, including substance use treatment experts, psychiatrists and doctors, funders such as the trust, and the back end with the folks you've already mentioned. And the conversation I'm having is, in my background, I work for a company that provides substance use treatment services. And in Anchorage, just like much of America, there's been this long divide over the question of housing first or treatment first. And although I never heard in my 20 plus years in the field anyone say treatment first, but that's, I think, from an old day before when things were different. And so I am working on, and I want to put into your ears that there is, I believe, a way to craft a housing model that has a substance use provision on site, but not required. So you achieve the housing first model requirement that they can't be forced to do anything of that nature, but you have it there. And that we could, in my opinion, develop a new model of treatment services that could achieve the goals of the consent decree, provide housing, and put additional substance use treatment services, which under the current Medicaid waiver would allow revenue for the operator outside of the housing vouchers that might be available to bridge that gap of that 300 or whatever those numbers might be for the difference of the operating cost. And so while all these conversations have been going on, I've been working to develop that model. And I just want to let you know that this conversation is happening, and it's potentially quite visionary and an opportunity to do something that hasn't really been seen in the country and could achieve our goals through our problem, not despite our problems.
Through the chair, Mr. Constant, I'm glad that you mentioned that. So yesterday I asked, as the conversation, we were having a conversation about, just an update on the Golden Lion, and Mr. Dole, who walked through there is if anybody who's been in the Golden Lion, there is a kind of a large ballroom area. And it's the idea of, how can you utilize that? And again, I don't want to speak for anybody. I don't want to make any promises. Just so you know that there were some concerns in trying to figure out how that would work as far as, could you utilize that ballroom for some sort of treatment facility? Because you don't want to waste the space, right? The only question I brought up at the time was, in order to be compliant with Title 21, rooming house is a very clear designation and what's allowed in a rooming house versus, and I don't know what the definition under Title 21 would be. I think it's treatment facility or medical treatment, something like that. Whatever it is in the table also has a very clear definitive examples, requirements is what is there. So what I don't know, and this is something that we're going to be working with planning on, is that could you have some sort of treatment location at the Golden Lion while it's being designated as a rooming house, or would you have to change the designation to a medical treatment facility? And would that allow for housing? I don't think it's insurmountable. Obviously, you guys control the code, and if the code needs to be changed for specific situations, and that's obviously up to your discretion and whether or not you want to do that. But we did have that discussion, and if we can operate within the current code to allow that and find that sweet spot for the designation, then we'd be all for it.
And so I would just speak back to that as you said, we are the authors of the code, and we also bound ourselves to that consent decree, and we want to achieve the goals that were set out because it's good and right policy. And so I invite you to be part of that conversation that I've been kind of having with these folks. And if there is a code change, I'll be happy to lead on that, because one thing we've learned of late is that the zoning code has effectively been a barrier to good policy in a number of areas. And so let us not limit us by what is written, but ask ourselves, what can we write to make it right?
Thank you. Mr. Cross?
Thank you. Yeah, and I would support that on-site treatment. I think that's a critical part of rehabilitation and improving the living situations of individuals that are in need of temporary or assisted living. My question with the treatment is, the largest issue we're facing regarding treatment is a lack of qualified personnel to provide those services. And that is why that's what they cited as far as the senior clinic at Alaska Regional. I know that out in Eagle River, we struggle with counselors and supervisors, even for kids in foster care, things like that, and child services, because there's just a lack of qualified individuals. So we can build these facilities, but I guess my next question is, what is our plan? Is there, or maybe there has been discussions on how do we team up with our local colleges, universities? What does that look like as far as an aggressive program in order to find qualified people to provide these services? Because if we build it, but we don't have anybody to provide it, because that's a very specialized treatment, then they just sit empty, and we don't really do any good unless we have the people to serve, to help, to assist us with that. So maybe someone can speak to a plan that they maybe are working on or they know of, that if we build these facilities and we provide them, how are we going to find the individuals that are qualified to provide these services?
Thank you, Mr. Cross. Hopefully you're going to say what I was going to say. Go ahead, Mr. Volant.
I don't know if I was going to say what you were going to say. No matter what it is, I don't think I will say it as eloquently as you would have. But I think that is a very important question, and part of the work that the Assembly should explore going forward. One thing that we just discussed in the Health Policy Committee was being able to essentially assist with workforce training in the area of substance use treatment. And to that end, we have appropriated a $100,000 grant to Recover Alaska in their efforts to team up with UAA and train upwards of 30 social workers. And that was one of the issues that was raised, is that there is that workforce shortage, and that would sort of be like the biggest dent. The most progress we can make is to train up that workforce. And so we did that using alcohol tax funds. And I think that is a great use of the alcohol tax funds, is to be able to support the growth of our workforce in that area.
And I think that was the intended purpose of the alcohol tax, to do exactly that. So thank you.
Great. Thank you. All right. I don't see anyone else in the queue for this topic. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to, since you guys were talking about treatment, Golden Lion, I just thought it would be wise, as you guys have those further discussions on an operations plan, that look how potentially as an RFP is written up for how this is going to operate based on a collaborative effort, that treatment component should absolutely be a conversation in the operations plan. That's something that's potential. I think would be foolish to probably not look at as being an option in the operations plan. That way, it's not you don't have to come back later on and try to find a treatment facility, right? If it's potential that you could utilize it as both.
Thank you, Mr. Trombley.
And Mr. Chairman, if you don't have anything for me, I have some other work to get done, unless there's other questions.
Yeah, let me see, Mr. Constant.
Yeah, a couple of things to clean up there. When we talk about the Golden Line, we're not talking about temporary housing. We're talking about permanent housing. And the model that I believe that is going to serve is an up and in program, where you get in and you have your condition wherever you are. And then they're able to, within the matrix of the available spaces, provide to you a room that matches your needs relative to others that are nearby. And then what happens is, should it become apparent that they would be served better in a different location, the system that is coordinated would help them find a lodging place in another location, whether that's in a place that's basis is straight up sobriety or a long-term permanent supportive housing environment that is housing first. It could be across the entire spectrum. And then one of the problems this solves is the simple fact that we have individuals who are in a permanent supportive housing unit somewhere in town, and they make a decision to go into treatment, and they want to get help, and they have to go to another location to get that treatment. And in order for them not to become homeless by that effective transition into a supportive treatment environment, we have to maintain the open bed where they're living at in their lease so they don't become homeless, which means that bed is empty and somebody out on the streets doesn't have a place. And so we have to think about these solutions in a way that's more permanent than transitional. But we also want to have options at every tier in that system available. And so I think that's a very important piece for everyone to continue reiterating so we understand we're talking about the same language. And as to the issue of the training, I believe also in one of the congressional bills that just passed, Senator Murkowski made substantial monies available for additional counselor training and recruitment. And I can tell you in the field, what's happening right now, we're recruiting aggressively, we're training peers who have been through the experience, and we're importing people who are willing to come to Alaska to serve. And so it's an important dynamic. It's, I think, like every other industry in America, part of the Great Resignation, we're just all dealing with it. But this is an area we are going to be successful in.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm going on time, so thanks. All right, so next, try to do 2 meetings and get everything in. It's still not enough. So next is, I'm actually going to change the agenda a little bit. So Mr. Trombley, as I understand it, will also be speaking to the legislative update regarding the approved MOA legislative program. So I want to squeeze that in before he has to leave. So the Assembly approved the legislative program in December, and in it, we put some pretty strong requests to assist the municipality with housing and homelessness. So I'd like for this committee to get regular updates on the work in Juneau to try and secure funding for these requests. As a reminder, the requests, as I saw them, were twofold. One, $20 million in capital budget fund to support 2 projects. Those 2 projects being $14 million for housing and $6 million for a low barrier shelter. And then the second thing was $5 million in operating funds for hotel conversions and low barrier shelter. So I'll turn it to Mr. Trombley for an update on that.
Sure. I spoke with the municipal lobbyist yesterday. As you know, session just started, so she's making the rounds and she's going to continue to advocate strongly for all aspects. I don't know what I can say. I don't want to say throw anyone under the bus. I don't mean that, but she's having particular conversations with certain legislators, and I don't know if you want me to mention those legislators' names. I don't feel comfortable doing that. Without their permission, of course. So if there's another way to have more in-depth conversations, I'm absolutely happy to do that. If you just find the proper format, just let me know. But just so you know, in regards to the homelessness aspect, I did get confirmation yesterday that there's multiple legislators who are very excited about making it happen. Anchorage caucus wise.
Okay, thanks. And could you just confirm in terms of, so I can understand the funding for the housing and how you might be speaking to legislators about the housing, but can you talk to me a little bit about how our lobbyist is speaking to legislators about the low barrier shelter? Are we speaking to them for like a specific project, or are we speaking to them in a more general way?
From my understanding, it's speaking about the program as a whole. So it's not looking at just one specific project or just one operational revenue stream. It's looking at homelessness as a whole. From my understanding, I can get more clarification on that if you'd want, if they're talking specifically to each individual project. If you're concerned about a navigation center in regards to the low barrier shelter, I have not heard that term come up with the municipal lobbyists, but that doesn't mean that conversation isn't being had. So I'll be happy to get that.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it would be of interest for this body, because this is, I think, a collaborative effort. And so we want to make sure that whatever lobbyist efforts are being done, that we aren't going different paths. So thank you for that. Okay, I guess my only other note is I know that myself and the chair LaFrance and possibly other assembly members will be going down to Juneau in February as part of AML. And so we would definitely want to be as strategic as possible to help leverage for funds for housing and homelessness. So if you feel like you necessarily can't share how we can best do that in this setting, I think it would be appropriate to find another setting where we could do that and be able to do that planning. Thanks. Anyone else on legislative update? Okay, not seeing anyone. Thank you so much, Mr. Trombley. All right, so then I'm going to go ahead back in our agenda. So the next item under the emergency shelter plan was the demobilization timeline. So if we can go ahead and pull that presentation up. All right, so this is my understanding of the scope of demobilization based on the information that has been presented to this committee. If this is inaccurate for any reason, I think it is important that we understand that as well, so we get all the facts on the table. So at the end of this presentation, I will invite the coalition or a representative from the Emergency Shelter Task Force, whichever is more appropriate, and the administration to just provide your comments. And I'm happy to update this because I think this is going to be something that perhaps in future meetings, it'll be a much shorter presentation, but something that we'll be coming back to on a regular basis. Of note, I will be making a lot of caveats on each of these slides, and I've tried to write those down in the slides as well so that just everyone knows some of the assumptions that I am making. And then also, I don't know how my brain forgot this, but I did not include the Golden Lion in any of these slides. So just know that it's not included in anything. Although I think as we heard today, if we go the most conservative route, Golden Lion wouldn't even be open until October anyway. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and start this presentation. Next slide. So basically this presentation is just looking at the numbers, and I'll explain what all of these colored boxes mean. But we're starting with January 19th, and the reason is because this is the data that was taken from the MOA shelter dashboard, as well as any reports that were given to the Housing and Homelessness Committee on January 18th. So that is the first slide. In terms of the color coordination here, the green boxes, those are all items that have contract amendments through March 31st. So these are all things that up until that point, they will be operating. The sort of mustard yellow colored boxes, those are items which have a little bit of an asterisk. The Covenant House, we cleared that up today. That one, up until today, we didn't know if there would be a contract amendment to extend those services. Now we know that there will be, so that'll change to the green color. The Aviator is that mustard yellow color because, as the footnote suggests, the Aviator has signaled that it will not be evicting individuals until other arrangements are in place. That said, the drawdown is shown as scheduled for the Aviator. So I will note that footnote during each slide, and I'll just reiterate it again. So the Aviator has said that they will not be evicting individuals until other arrangements are in place, but they also have provided a schedule for the drawdown. So that's what's presented here. The blue are basically any ideas or things that have been coming up. And as you'll see, we don't have ideas. We just have idea 1, 2, and 3. As I understand it, in February, we will be presented with hopefully some specific ideas. So looking forward to being able to fill that out in future months. So we'll go ahead and move on to the next slide, please. So the next data point here is January 30th, and that is the drawdown in the Aviator from the 123 rooms to the 65 rooms. In large part, I'm using the same information from the previous slide as a baseline with some noted distinctions. So I'm basically assuming max occupancy and everything versus the last slide had in some cases lesser occupancy. And I'm also just assuming for cleaner numbers, a sort of more rounded numbers, using the 100 in the Sullivan Arena warming area and the 90 in the Alex Hotel. I will also say, just as a caveat for the Sullivan Arena warming area, it's still unclear to me exactly what that number represents, whether that number truly represents 100 people going in that area in a 24-hour period, whether it represents duplication of individuals. I think there's a lot of, for me, sort of unknowns what that number means, and hopefully we can get some clarity on that so that we can better reflect that number in the future. I will go ahead and note the drawdown. So these drawdowns are from date to date. So the drawdown from January 19th to January 30th is represented here as 67 people and 58 rooms. So we're losing that capacity. Then the next date is February 6th. If we can go to the next slide. So this slide continues to show the drawdown for the Aviator. So from 65 rooms to 47 rooms. And nothing else has changed. So that drawdown is 18 rooms / people. I'm also sort of making assumptions of 1-to-1 ratio for rooms and people. That could change into the future. Yeah, Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and apologies for the interruption. I'm just not tracking where those people from the Aviator are going.
Yeah, so that's the issue, isn't it? Right?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so they're not, these slides are not showing,
Yeah, so you will see a final slide that
Okay.
shows you the scope of the problem that we're
Got it.
facing.
Thank you.
Yes. Yeah. So next slide is April 3rd. If we can, thank you. So this slide continues to show the drawdown at the Aviator. It also assumes that the Assembly takes no action to extend emergency shelter contracts, although I think we should look into this more, but I think it's questionable whether we can actually use the Title 16 trigger to extend emergency shelter in those situations, because I think at that point, we might not be able to meet the weather trigger. It also assumes that the mayor does not declare an emergency on homelessness at that point. And it also assumes that all of the Barrett Inn beds come online at the same time. I will invite either the Rasmussen Foundation or the the Anchorage Affordable Housing and Land Trust to comment on that timeline if they feel like it should be presented differently. Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Cross.
Well, it's important to note that Barrett Inn is not low barrier and Sullivan Arena is. So that's a two totally different qualifications for individuals that are being housed. Are there? Am I wrong on that? I thought Barrett Inn was housing and Sullivan Arena. So, and I'm just making sure people see that as these go down, it's not that the Sullivan Arena people are going into Barrett Inn. That's not how that works at all. That's a different qualification. Am I mistaken on that? To some degree, but I mean, it's not a direct migration. So it's not like Sullivan closes and we can put them in Barrett Inn. To some degree, some people will qualify, but other people will have to, I want to make sure the public doesn't think it's just a direct, like we just take and put them in. No, there's qualifications. And so it's more of like we got to redirect to the appropriate place. So just because Barrett opens, it doesn't mean all the people in Sullivan or those individuals that direct migration.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Cross, for pointing that out. I think everything that's presented on these slides are all parts of the equation, and we have still some unknown parts of the equation. And I think in the future, we will see some of those fill out. So what I'm hoping that we'll talk about a little bit later during the gap analysis of the gap of our shelter beds. And so one of the things that I imagine will be filled in one of these idea boxes is the need for additional shelter beds. And so how things move around in the system, I don't talk about that at all in these slides. These slides just show the scope. So I myself, I would invite other individuals to talk about how things will move within the system. That is not something that I feel qualified to speak at. And that if that's something that you want, we can have that in the future. Okay, so I think that covers this. I will just say this is the biggest month in terms of the slide date-by-date comparison in terms of the drawdown. So between February 6th and April 3rd, it's a significant drawdown. And I think this is the date where we really need to make sure we have some alternative ideas in place. So next slide, please. So this one, April 10th, simply shows the continued scheduled drawdown for the Aviator. So they're going from 30 rooms to 12 rooms on April 10th. Next slide, please. And then this slide shows the final drawdown at the Aviator, going from 12 rooms to 0 rooms. So I think the idea being that at that point, we would no longer be using the Aviator. Again, this was all part of the schedule that was given to the administration and given to me. And I think that schedule was also put on the committee website. Next slide, May 1. This is just a placeholder. So nothing really substantive changes between April 17th and May 1. And then June 1, just because that was the sort of the number that or the date that I heard for the second hotel conversion. So that's assuming that all 50 of those rooms come online at the same time. That may not be the reality. And again, I invite folks to provide those corrections as needed. So what does that look like in terms of a comparison? If we can go to the last slide. So I think this gets to Ms. LaFrance's question of, so how many people are we talking about and what are we doing with those people? This gets to the first part of that, which is by my math and calculations, which again, I'm running off of all kinds of assumptions here in my math and calculations, which I tried to do my best to note. I will invite people to correct those so that we have a better and fuller and more factual picture. But that number there at the end, that 576, I think that is that first part of the question, which is how many people are we talking about? What we do, I think, is when we're really going to start delving into in February, because as I understand it, both the administration and the Emergency Shelter Task Force will be doing some good work to help provide some of those ideas to present to us in February. So this, though, is really just so folks can get a scope of the issue, and it's a fairly significant issue for us to deal with. So actually, first, before I go to if anyone has any questions, I'll turn to start with the coalition or the Emergency Shelter Task Force if a representative just wants to speak to this briefly.
Thank you, Meg Zalatel. So a couple of things. First, we plan to share this with the Emergency Shelter Task Force to have them take a look at these numbers in concurrence with the plan that's coming from the municipality. I think we're missing a couple of things here. One is emergency cold weather shelter has traditionally run through the end of April. So a cutoff of April 1 is a little bit different than the planning that the original Emergency Cold Weather Shelter Task Force did. And that's because we can get quite inclement and unpredictable weather in April and can actually meet the temperature trigger even in April. Second, we need to account somewhere in here for both unsheltered individuals right now and what the expectation is of how many people will be unsheltered absent no additional shelter being online. I think that will be a big piece to the resources, particularly if there isn't a Title 16 trigger after either March 31st or April 30th. And finally, with regard to the warming center numbers, I think they're inflated for planning purposes. I believe they're closer to 50 to 60 people, and we're trying to get more information about who's accessing warming. We do understand that some people are accessing warming to see people they know, and they aren't necessarily experiencing homelessness. So we're really trying to drill down on who, through outreach, we employ HMIS and coordinated entry assessments. So we're really trying to get a better picture in that engagement of who's accessing warming and where that subpopulation fits within the overall planning picture. And then on your housing numbers per location, quick correction, the number 2 hotel is 45 units, but it's fair to say at least 50 people. There are some multi-room units. And similarly, we can work to refine that number on the Barrett, assuming some multi-people units, because that is what is planned. And then finally, to Mr. Cross's question, The folks we have identified likely to go into the Barrett based on their need and where they're at on coordinated entry, most of them are in the Sullivan right now. So it may not be a direct pipeline, but we do happen to know where they are. A lot of them have vouchers. And so we do suspect that to be a drawdown from that location when it does go into effect. Anything else I missed, Taria? Okay. Yeah, I did talk about unsheltered, and we can give you our updated unsheltered contacts. We'll add that into this right now because we are keeping those, keeping track of those on a weekly basis in an unduplicated number. So that'll give us an idea of how many people right now we're having contact with who are unsheltered in the community.
Great, thank you. I will go ahead and turn to the administration if you want to provide any thoughts.
Yeah, through the chair. Our numbers, I just reached out to my team. Our numbers are similar to yours. I am trying to get some clarification on if we are contracted through the 1st or if we're contracted through the end of April. I believe Emergency Cold Weather Task Force and the administration had planned to go through the end of April. So I'll get some clarification on that. But as far as the housing numbers go, we did get an update from the Aviator Hotel that they may have some additional rooms available, but that is heavily dependent on funding, and that's an ongoing conversation. So I wouldn't have any updates for that, but hopefully we can come to some sort of term on that and make sure we're sheltering and housing as many people as possible. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I think if you could provide just an email notification for to me on whether that, I think you said it was 4.7 million, whether that goes through the end of April or April 1. I think the sooner we know that, the better.
Through the chair, I'm being told that that is through the end of April.
Okay, great. Well, then that changes this. Great, fantastic. All right, any questions from the body on this? Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Cross.
How does the navigation center fit into this equation?
Through the chair, are you talking the Tudor Elmore Navigation Center?
Yes, the one that we poured a partial foundation for and toured the site and was supposed to be, and then because of procurement issues and inappropriate money spending, got sidetracked and is now just sitting there like a giant hole in the ground.
Through the chair to Mr. Cross. So the presentation that we'll be presenting to the Continuum of Care, the coalition, ultimately the Housing and Homelessness Committee, and then to the Assembly, we will have a caveat if the Navigation Center does go through, but as of right now, we are not planning to have that up and running and to have it as a usable facility. If that changes, great. If it doesn't, we do want to have a contingency plan. As far as the Navigation Center and shelter goes, that would shelter 150 people with an additional surge of 50 should there be an emergency. So it could provide up to 200 additional shelter beds if it came online. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yeah, go ahead.
So in conferring with Taria here, there's a few things we realize aren't considered here, which is any housing outflow from Brother Francis Shelter and that additional capacity. So Brother Francis, Downtown Hope Center, Gospel Rescue Mission are all moving people through the system towards housing. And so what we can do is we can take a look at the data with regards to those and see what the outflow is, because obviously then other people will pick up those shelter beds. We also don't know what impact the Third Avenue Resource Center will have. That'll be a housing intense environment for service providers. So we're thinking about how we capture those contacts and identifying if people are coming from an unsheltered status or from one of the shelters, and then what the success rate is in moving people to housing. So I think there's a bit more flow in here that isn't quite yet accounted for, but we can help refine based on a look back over the last 6 months of the data.
Great, thank you. That's exactly the kind of conversation I was hoping for. So this will be helpful and hopefully will not paint as bleak of a picture, but still a lot of work that we need to do between now and April. Any other discussion? Yes, Ms. Dern, go ahead.
Ms. Salatel answered a lot of my questions. I assume Claire House and the other beds that Covenant House has for children and for families will also be included in that data.
So I believe this is a look at single adults. We also watched the flow for families. So there's a separate emergency cold weather stood up for families, and we can certainly bring you that information about what the flow is there out of Clare House into its transitional housing program, out of the single site into other transitional housing and permanent housing, and then similarly for transition aged youth at Covenant House. There's currently emergency cold weather stood up. When that ends, that is a segment of the population that will have to be considered in this planning. And then we can get some data from Covenant House about what their shelter utilization rate has looked like over maybe a 12-month period. Shelter utilization in the summer is just very different than it is in the winter, with the exception of families, if there's family shelter available. That seems to be a very consistent, high, constant utilization. But when it's nicer out, there is less utilization amongst transition-aged youth and single adults.
Thank you. I have to leave right now. Can I be excused? Thank you very much.
Yeah, Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just want to make sure I'm summing up correctly because, this is an area of very high public interest. And so is it accurate then to say that by mid-April, the aviator is expected to be at zero, to be fully drawn down, and that given that there are a number of moving parts, such as the outflow with other providers, other facilities, it's not clear yet how what the gap is, what the number is for the need, and that it will be likely changing in the next couple months, and that this committee will be talking with the administration and partners. And is this in the context also of this committee or other people talking about a broader plan? I know we just heard about the navigation center isn't expected to be online, and I don't know if that's ever, or if you're just talking, Ms. Johnson, about for the short term. I know you mentioned also, Ms. Johnson, that there's no intent by the administration to stand up Centennial Campground or perhaps presumably any other campground. So I'm just wanting to make sure I'm clear on the big picture. I don't really know who that's a question to, if it's a question.
Thanks. So I'll invite the administration to tackle that one.
Thanks so much, through the chair, to Ms. LaFrance. We did receive an email today that there are some rooms going to be made available that will not be remodeled. Right now, the budget that we have put forward is on this original demobilization schedule that they provided us at the end of last year. So that'll be an ongoing conversation if funding is available. The numbers that Mr. Rivera have put forward are similar to the numbers that we are planning to prepare for. As far as the navigation center, I want to operate in realistic terms. Right now, we're going into February, and if there is an opportunity for a navigation center and shelter to be built on Tudor and Elmore prior to the demobilization of our emergency cold weather shelter, I would happily plan for that. But right now, our plan is to act with what we have and the infrastructure that's currently built out. So we are not planning for the navigation center, but we will have a caveat on our presentation that if it should come online, and if we can get this built in a timely manner, we will have that as an asset. But we are not planning to use that right now. As far as, what was your second question? I'm sorry.
Confirmation about Centennial Campground or any other campground as a means of, well, it's not providing shelter, but as a, whatever you call it, to relocate people. It sounds horrible to say it like that, but is that factoring into any conversation?
Yeah, so if I could just jump to our timeline that we're hoping to present. I'm having ongoing conversations with the administration. Centennial Campground has not been discussed yet. Not to say it won't be, so I don't want to go on the record and say that. But right now our focus is maintaining adequate indoor shelter. And trying to bring on as many housing units online as possible and as soon as possible. The administration and my department plan to present 3 options, a good, better, best, depending on the housing that are coming online. In the near future, we are going to present to the demobilization task force on February 10th. We're going to seek recommendations. And Taria, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it's actually a subcommittee of the demobilization task force. And so we'll present to them on February 10th. That's a Thursday. We're going to seek recommendations, requested changes, how we can improve the plan. And then we'll reconvene the demobilization task force on that Monday through the coalition's emergency cold weather shelter task force. And that will be on Monday, February 13th. We'll give final presentation approval, and then we'll request COC support for that plan. So we're kind of all swimming in the same direction. We will present the approved and concurred plan at the Housing and Homelessness Committee meeting, whether it be on February 15th, that Wednesday, or the following week on February 22nd. And then
You can't get COC approval until after the 23rd of February. That's when they convene in February.
okay. So maybe we can request a Housing and Homelessness Committee meeting following that, if you guys are requesting COC approval and concurrence of that plan. So we can discuss that, and then we're hoping to send the concurred plan to Assembly members that day, and then hope to seek approval from a memorandum at the following Assembly meeting, so that we're all in agreement on what the plan is and how to move forward.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Constant.
Thanks. I have a question on a different topic related, since all the parties are here. Point in time count and Homeless Connect.
Yep. So point in time count is actually next week. And it is going to be conducted by the outreach teams through outreach coordination. There is some coordination also with the Anchorage Downtown Partnership because they know where to locate individuals in the downtown area. We also have partnered with the restaurant program through United Way to provide burritos and care packages to people. We like to bring things when we're going to ask people for information. I would caution that the point in time count is a snapshot, and we have a much more robust data system. I feel like it's a little bit of a holdover from HUD's previous system. So we are working on Project Homeless Connect. With the institution of the pavilion pop-ups and kind of taking resources to the people on a mobile basis, we're figuring out how to do 1 to 2 annual events, but then really to continue to be mobile. One of the things we were able to do with our grant from the alcohol tax funds in cooperation with the health department was to get a shower trailer, and that will be here within about 45 days. And it's for season. And we're really hoping to catalyze that as an opportunity to bring services to the folks where they are. It's really a new paradigm. As we have the Project Homeless Connect information, we'll keep you all looped in. I know that's a much broader cross-sector services for the day, but it's only usually happened once a month in the past, or sorry, once a year in the past in March. And I think we're pushing out a little bit further towards May.
So it's funny that you should say that, because this morning I had a conversation with Duke Russell, who's been doing his work at the Sullivan Arena, and he started talking about, I would like to do something in which we are able to provide haircuts and connection opportunities. And so that's where my mind immediately started thinking the Homeless Connect. And then effectively, like great minds, we were thinking about maybe this should be done once a month or in a more regularized fashion, which I think in some ways needs to develop a list of those entities and organizations who have historically provided the service for a day, and figuring out who is willing to do a little more. Maybe they have some friends. And so I'd be interested in helping, and that conversation is percolating right now.
Thank you. And we would welcome the partnership. We've spent the last 2.5 months really focused on building trust relationships with the outreach teams and people who are unsheltered, meeting their immediate needs. We thought that was a good basis to start, and then to start layering on the offer of services. We didn't want outreach to be we have things you need, but only in exchange for services. So we do look forward to doing that. And really, HUD has encouraged us, and we've taken that encouragement as a mandate to take services to the people. We're working on plans with partners for mobile case management, really meeting people where they're at. So there's as few stops between where you're at and a home and a house.
Yeah, it just dawns on me, maybe we should also reach out to some of the beauty schools and do some kind of recruitment for internship work so that they can be gaining skills. And anyhow, thank you for that, and know that there are folks at the arena seeking to set a pop-up opportunity.
Thanks. All right, I got to go ahead and get us moving on. So thanks for all of that. I look forward to continuing to fine tune so that we can get a better sense of the scope. So next on the agenda are the two items that were added. So first is food policy implementation. As I understand it, Mr. Duke Russell wanted to speak to us on this item. Is Mr. Russell available? Okay, great. Hi. Actually, sir, if you can come up and you can take a seat and you can use a mic.
Okay, take a seat there, okay.
And it's on for you.
Okay, hello, thank you for having me today. We kind of went full circle. Donald from the health department on Thursday met with me and was describing my situation as a permanent food permit required. Basically, it's a permanent food establishment that they would have all the standards for a commercial restaurant. And he went looking, and basically we fulfill the definition of a private party. Advocates, such as a church potluck, requires no permit. And so we are back to basically doing what we were doing, which was absolutely no problem. Nobody was having any foodborne illnesses, and we have professionals on our team that you would be shocked at the talent we have on our team. So, it was never an issue, but I was pretty upset about it because, for the situation right now, I had a personal experiment going on. So for the last 2 weeks, except for the last weekends, because churches usually do the weekends, so for 10 days, I pretty much single-handedly, made 15 gallons of soup a day and delivered it, served it, washed the pots, reset again for the next day. And I implemented a couple of things like having somebody go give them water while they stand in line. We go through 5 or 6 gallons of water. People are chronically dehydrated and they don't feel good enough about themselves to take care of themselves. Many of the folks really do need a minder. And, a lot of them, I saw one yesterday being interviewed by a policeman, and she's extra cheese to me. And so extra cheese usually doesn't talk like her feet are completely on the ground. And I understand where she's coming from, but what business is a police officer interviewing this person who I don't know her capacities or whatever, but she should have had somebody there as some kind of advocate. Because who knows, like, what if she had like a trigger or something, and then all of a sudden now she's in the back of a police car, This how sensitive everything is. Somebody just got really badly hurt. Everybody's freaked out, like, am I next? And it's like everything's calm. And then all of a sudden, boom, 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 everybody's angry. And that's what I was doing. I was what I call break the line. I brought enough food to where people stopped coming back for thirds. And everybody's laughing, telling jokes. I'm not saying it's utopia, but they're not cat scratching in line anymore. We've created rapport. They are incredibly grateful because before now, when I did hot cereal for the last week, they were getting dry milk in an athletic cooler meant for water, football teams, all that, and a box of Cheerios, and they have at it. So you stand in line for this. And I was saying this to some security guy, he was like trying to defend it. And I'm sorry. I just don't think that's acceptable. That we can, people gave me some rice to serve, and it was expiry date of 2008. So this rice is 14 years old. People have been giving me cans of food. And it's like I'm chefing for 300 people. There is a disconnect in the actual, scope of what's happening. And the more people that I bring to help me serve, the more people understand the situation. And the more people they bring, and the more not normalized, but there's a little bit more of an even foot when there's more people that are functioning, at some level. And then they just reflect that, but if there's just nothing but nuts everywhere, it's not good for anybody. And then plus they're not being fed. The brain, is not working properly to, get the water back in, get the nutrition. And I make all my soups, really totally fresh from scratch. And that's what they love, the home cooking and just the humanity of it. It's the love. It's not the number of beds. It's not the number of sheets or panties, whatever it is. It's the love, and it's lacking in a serious way. No, you hear the talk shows, it's always about data. But what about how much actual human emotion it's going to require to listen to their painful stories? This is really compelling stuff. I had no background in social services. I'm an artist, and I'm a freewheeling outside dog. I don't do meetings very well. That's why I don't go to the assembly meetings. I'm afraid I'd lose some self-control. I feel a lot safer in this environment. So, I'm just like very passionate about what I've seen. It's not acceptable. People are being raped in Centennial Park, and it is beyond like, it's not just like isolated this, isolated that. It's just like this realm of chaos. And we're trying to calm this with the simple, what's within arm's reach, giving them water in line and telling them what's for lunch, like a human being, and try sort of like being served as if you were in a restaurant, and with the same kindness and gratitude that you would expect when you went out to support a business, And that whole relationship is the baby steps, like it was mentioned before. First, feed them, gain some trust. Don't come in there like Simpson's neighbor and go, hey, Oakley dokley, and all this. They do not want it, because you're not really seeing the travesty that they're in the middle of, because even though you want everything to be better for yourself as well as for them, you got to start where they're at. And that's exactly, you just got to stay there. Stop inputting any story about yourself or anything. You just go there and you hear them out, and they will tell you, given the trust. So sorry, I went on.
Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead.
So a couple of things. First, Duke, thank you for this major change in your life that's happened since Centennial Park opened. I've known you for a long time, some 25 years, and I've never seen you so dedicated to a singular cause in all of those years, other than supporting your family, selling art, a rare individual I know who has lived a life of art. And I appreciate the art that you're bringing to this new mission. So I have a question for the team. And that question is, what is the policy for food that we're providing through the contract? And then there might be a little bit more detail.
Through the chair to Mr. Constant, originally the operators of the Sullivan Arena were using a licensed kitchen and food delivery service. And then when Sullivan kind of became the focal point for homelessness and the response in the municipality, we saw a lot of outreach groups that were coming forward, churches, community aid groups that were mobilizing and who wanted to offer support. So originally, when that came forward, the discussion hadn't been had yet about, what do we do in an instance when a church wants to come out and provide food? And I think from a community standpoint, we see, well, why can't we just let anyone who wants to come out and, serve food? And from my standpoint, obviously we support community aid, and we like to see that the community is engaging with people experiencing homelessness and kind of like getting rid of the stigma and some of the narratives surrounding people experiencing homelessness. So we honor that, and we want to work with that. As far as a health department standpoint, there are, code requirements, health safety, food service safety that we have to abide by. And so in discussions with Duke, we have, and with Mr. Wingate from the health department in food safety, we have been trying to work with all community groups, not just Duke's group, to ensure the highest quality safety and to ensure that we can continue to allow them. That discussion is ongoing, and we're working with them to get permitted. In the discussion, I think, may have finalized this morning about them being allowed to operate as like a church potluck. And there's still no food preparation on site. So I just want to clarify that we are not like cooking food or preparing food, because the Sullivan Arena kitchen is not a licensed kitchen at this time.
So what are we paying in the contracts for meals and expecting to have delivered as meals outside of these community driven efforts?
Through the chair, to Mr. Constant, we have internally with the operator at the Sullivan, as of now, 3 secure meals a day. They're working with church groups. They're also working with Duke's groups or Duke's group, and then as well as their main food service provider to organize 3 square meals a day at the Sullivan.
And how are we measuring that's actually happening?
Through the chair, I think with invoicing reporting, as far as like with their food, like their actual contractual obligations, we have allocated enough funding for them to have 3 square meals a day. As far as reporting, I can get with Henning's operators.
Right. Yeah, because just because we fund it doesn't mean it's happening.
Correct.
Right.
I can tell you it's not happening.
Right. And that's my concern, is that we start this thing as a pop-up or implemented because of a crisis, and then we get rolling and we don't have the proper checks and balances to make sure that we're actually doing what we think we're doing. And so, and obviously we have some perspectives that things aren't being done. And that wasn't the reason I brought Duke here. We were having a conversation. The reason I brought Duke here is because I want to ask, what can we do to help you be more successful, Duke? And that might not be something we answer today because we are running out of time. But I wanted also to introduce you all to the effort that he's been leading. And so that's important. But I would like us to have a real feedback loop on, are we actually achieving what we set out to do? Are people being fed? Because hungry people are angry people. Come to an assembly meeting at 7 o'clock at night. You'll see.
I've clearly seen that. I've
Yeah.
clearly seen that, but in the difference between the two. I keep being told that there are other groups coming in and stuff, but then like yesterday, I purposely, because we were on the outs, I made sandwiches instead of soup. And I said, I'm going to come at 2 o'clock because I know if there was going to have a lunch, they'd come at 12 or 12:30. They called it off. And they waited, until I came and gave out the sandwiches, and they hadn't had nothing. And so we're being used. I don't mind, for the sake of the continuity and of my own personal experiment in terms of hydration and nutrition, vegetarian food, clean product, super high standards. That's my experience.
Delivered with kindness.
Yeah, and delivered with kindness and knowing their name and eye contact, all that.
Thank you.
So part of it, I don't even care about anyone really, in a way, outside of the folks I'm trying to serve, because everybody seems to be in my way. I was kicked out at Centennial Hall, and then the paper read that, oh, I wasn't kicked out, but I was kicked out, and for horrible reasons, stupid reasons. There was no issue, there was no problem. It's just perceived problems, perceived things. London is literally burning. That arena is in poor condition. They're trying to make it better. They're trying to make it work. I'm not faulting anyone, but for people to look at really one of the primary things, and we were doing a large thing, is no fooling. I did over 6,000 meals this last month, and double and doing breakfast because I could not stand to see the Cheerio thing. And it's so easy to make hot cereal. That's the thing, is like the intention is very apparent that this is all about industry and money exchanging and contracts and all this kind of stuff. And then, trouble, hire more security guards, right. How about, feeding and being nice, stop acting like this is county, because that's what it is. It's either county or a psych ward or something, people just kind of barking things at people. They're difficult. They can be very difficult.
Thanks, Duke. It's funny you said counting. I thought you said county like county jail.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah.
And so, thank you for this presentation.
No,
This
thank
is an
you.
ongoing
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah,
I was
didn't
reached
mean to
out to by
dominate.
Duke 6 weeks ago, and he asked for help getting into one of the on-site food prep areas. And without any kind of fanfare, Kent made it possible, and they got him into the old burrito place where they have an opportunity to do basic
That
food.
is so much an improvement. There's no methane gas coming out of that. And yeah, it's really clean. We cleaned up really good. It's just a presentable. We love it.
And so the mission is, let's figure out a way to support these organizations, in particular the ones that are actually doing it, not just the ones that might possibly do it.
Thanks. So before we move on, I just need to try to map out the rest of our meeting. So I'm probably going to be asking for an extension of about another 15 minutes. And in those 15 minutes, I want to conclude this conversation. I want to see if is someone from AHFC here to speak. Okay. Well, then I at least want to say what I was going to say during that portion of the meeting, because I think I want that on the record. And then I want to see if we can squeeze in the Home for Good presentation. Otherwise, they're going to be having to leave here in a minute. And my apologies. There's just too much for us to get done, no matter how much time we allocate. So, Ms. Zalatel.
Thank you. I just want to give a little historical context of emergency cold weather shelter. It's always provided 3 meals a day. And when the Sullivan was originally stood up as a COVID relief effort and mass care shelter, it also provided 3 meals a day. And those meals have been linked to USDA standards for nutrition. So there have been standards in the past, and not adhering to those standards, those historical standards, isn't best practices. We're very thankful for Duke's efforts and for the community's efforts, but it's our opinion that best practices require that adequate nutrition be provided at shelter by the responsible entity. Donations come and go. Duke's efforts could end tomorrow. And so we believe that the contracts should be very clear. It should have standards, and those standards should be followed without equivocation, and that anything else is extra. Because people are hungry and food insecure, and having food insecurity is a terrible trauma to add on top of being in a shelter or otherwise being unsheltered. The coalition has taken its outreach with meals to the warming area. We have brought in snacks to the warming area. And it is just, we've got to have a better plan moving forward. Without food security, we're not going to move forward. I wouldn't expect any clients in the shelter to engage in case management or going through the steps to housing. It is about trust, as Duke said. Without trust, these folks aren't going to engage with us. And even when they engage, we're going to tell them, housing units are still hard to come by. We really need a trust proposition to keep sustained, continued engagement. It's not a one and done. Thanks.
Thanks. So I'm going to have a final comment on this before we move on. And that's, I think, echoing a little bit of what Ms. Zalatel stated. I think it's great that groups offer support and that individuals step up and become heroes in this time. But I think there has to be a baseline, and that must be maintained by the individual or the responsible entity. And in that case, we are the responsible entity. So I think that's in part why we passed a policy regarding food, because we know that, one, we want to make sure people have a roof over their head, and that two, the next immediate need we wanted to fulfill for people was food. And so it's disappointing to me to hear that not only at the Sullivan, but I'm hearing that there are issues all across the emergency shelter response regarding food. So what I'm going to request is the chair to schedule a work session on this topic, because I think we really need to dive into this. This is a basic human need, and it appears to me that it's just not being fulfilled in an adequate fashion. Okay, with that, I'm going to go ahead and move us on. So I'm going to just speak briefly to the ERA2 funds, which was something else that I had added to the agenda. So last month, we heard from the administration regarding these funds. and it appeared that everything was on track. I recently invited representatives from AHFC to come in today to speak to us and confirm that everything is actually on track. And specifically, I sent them 3 questions, and it appears that they couldn't be here. So those questions being: 1, how will the funds be administered by AHFC? 2, what is the mechanism and timeline to process these funds? And 3, is HFC in agreement with the Assembly's intention for these funds? And as folks will remember, we added some pretty specific intent language into the appropriation document. And I think it's critical for us to understand how AHFC will be implementing what the Assembly approved, as there are a lot of individuals relying on these funds to stay stably housed. So hopefully I will get a response soon in writing from AHFC, and then I will forward that to the I will ask the clerk to forward that to the body, and hopefully this issue will just become a non-issue. Otherwise, I will find another avenue to raise this to the body. Okay, so then I'm going to move on. So is a representative from United Way here? I'm changing up the agenda because United, thank you, because they can only stay for
ask
a
quick
short amount of
question
time.
before we dive into the?
Yeah,
You're
go ahead.
saying, maybe I'm just not caught up to speed here. AHFC, Alaska Housing Finance Corporation. You're not referring to the Rasmussen new group.
Yeah, correct.
Okay.
Yeah, we are going to need a motion. So if I can get a motion to extend by 15 minutes.
Second.
Any opposition to the motion? Okay, not seeing any, then we are extended to 12:45. All right, if we can go ahead, pull up that presentation, please. So it's been a long time since this committee has had a presentation about Home for Good, which is a program that the Assembly first approved in 2019. We have a lot of new members who weren't here in 2019, a couple of which are here. So hopefully you can help provide some context as you give your update. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm Nancy Burke with the United Way, and with me is Samantha Longacre, who's the director of the Home for Good program. And we're presenting about this project. It has some very important elements for our community. It takes people who are rising to the top of emergency services within the municipality, so police data, fire data, and health department data. And it integrates those lists of people who we see frequently in those areas. And then we cross that grouping of data over homelessness information. So we're looking for people who are homeless and using those emergency services in the community. And this is the first time that that data has been integrated for the municipality. And I believe one of the first times that we've been able to target a contract-based service system toward this population. And so we're pleased to present an update on the project today. Next slide, please. So as I said, these are the folks, people with a history of what's called recidivism, is people who return to corrections facilities frequently, and then people who are using emergency services in the form of police and fire, as well as the safety patrol and the safety center. And then we're crossing the list over people who are in our HMIS system. You'll note that in 2019, when we proposed this project, the number was 350. That was the number of people who hit the bullseye of each of those areas. Today, that number on our list is 900, and we can think a lot about that. But one of the things we do know is our data quality has increased in HMIS. We do know that the longer people are in the homeless service system, the more intense their needs become and the more traumatized they are. So we could also think that that list is likely growing over time. Next slide. This project has a number of funders. It was initiated in 2016 with a HUD DOJ Department of Justice grant. Those are two federal agencies that came together to offer an opportunity for communities to run projects like ours, and with a seed grant to set up the contracting-based services. And so that money has held us through. We've actually just expended the last of that grant over time. And the concept of this project is that traditional grant programs are a mechanism for achieving goals in a community. They rely on sending money out and requesting an end product. Given that this program was new for the community and we had a lot to learn, we felt that using a contracting-based program would work better. So we've used these funders in the middle column to recruit money to run the program. And then at the end of the time, when the outcomes are achieved, the municipality pays for those outcomes. It's a way for a local government and sometimes a state government to really target funds and to allow for creativity and adaptation over time in a project, not to predict the outcomes or the method of getting there at the beginning, but to allow for some more iterative processes to occur. And then the government only pays for the outcomes that are desired. So we have our project managers, which is the United Way of Anchorage. We have a national partner, Social Finance, that helps stand up financial contracting like our project in communities across the country. The municipality is our partner, and of course the coalition is in with us on this project. Our service providers include South Central Foundation, which is our main service provider at this point. Choices is a smaller behavioral health organization, and then Alaska Behavioral Health. Next slide. This is our weekly metrics. That's one aspect of this project that's important. We look at our metrics weekly, and we have conversations with our partners if things don't look like they're heading in the direction that we need them to be. And so you can see in this project, we will routinely have people in outreach. Because our referrals come from data lists, it sometimes can be challenging to find people in the community who are currently present. People will come and go from the community, so the number in outreach will change over time. And the number in supportive services includes people who have been housed and are still receiving our services, and those in outreach. So the total project participants as of today is 100. And then we track the number of people who've made it to housing. So the end outcome for this project is housing for people. And these folks are the ones who take a lot of extra time in the service system. They've been very traumatized. They have a lot of distrust of service providers and generally everyone. And so the housing is very important because we know from our participants and from other projects nationally that that's where you see stabilization and you see people accessing the services needed to regain their lives. The end product, and one that we want to talk with assembly members and our partners at Alaska Housing Finance Corporation and anyone who will listen, is that we have to have folks on rental subsidies at the end of this program. If there's a cliff at the end and they don't have rental subsidies, we do not want to jeopardize stability that's happened for those 67 people in housing, and ultimately the number will be 150 at the end of the project. Next slide. So these are the outcomes that we're seeing, and you can see there's two groupings here. Housing stability is the main outcome of this project, but housing stability is made up of a number of clinical and personal measures that are important to the community and to the person. And so this on the right side of this slide is a picture of those aspects that are important to the community. And so you can see that we have safety center intakes down by 76%, arrests down by 70%, 44% reduction in EMS transports, those are calls for ambulances, and 72% reduction in shelter stays. On the left side, we have a 47% stability, which is tracking how many months our tenants were able to remain stably in housing. And I'll take a breath because there might be a question.
Thanks, Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Burke. Just a clarifying question. And again, these outcomes are for the participants in the program.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Yes. These are, well, I won't go into any more detail because I'd be happy to talk to you more and probably endlessly about that.
Thanks, Mr. Constant.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking the same thing from the other side. Is there a control group? Did we
No,
pick
we
a
did
set
not
of
run a
folks?
control. No, we're doing pre and post 1 year prior and 1 year after.
Yeah, I wonder if there's any way to kind of figure out a peer group that might be reviewable with certain records internally to the Muni, HMIS records, intakes, police, all of those things to get a sense, because it could be argued, and I'm not saying it is, it could be argued that some of this is just trends in other things. Access is down because, or up, I don't know.
Yeah.
It certainly raises a data
Sure.
question. And so I don't know if there's a way to back that out, find some individuals, and this wouldn't be a United Way. This would certainly have to be a Muni thing.
I think it would have to be a state thing. We talked quite a bit about doing a control group, but the number, because the population's pretty mobile, the number of people that would have to be in a control exceeded the number of people that we thought were a true match in the community.
Right.
We did run a small comparison group on the original Carlick Manor study, but it was very hard to keep the control group together. But I would love to talk with you some more about that. I think it would involve the state's participation, and that could be really interesting and informative.
Yeah, and certainly as we get closer to whatever the inflection point is at which the study is published, it has been a success because all of these things have happened. It would be wise to have some benchmark and some from a
Agreed.
general population.
Agreed.
I don't know how we'll get there, but it's
Sure.
important.
Thank you. Next slide, please. The things that are important to the tenants, Sam is doing a really amazing job connecting not only the service providers, but connecting to our tenants. There are monthly activities where we actually meet with them, and some of our tenants, I'm going to just brag for a minute, are really good bowlers. So, that we'll throw down for any assembly members who want to come on out. But getting to the key of people who are stabilized. This is one of our participants, and she is going back to school.
This is Alice, and Alice was staying in shelter and outside for about 10 years before she was in Home for Good. And then her case management team has told us her story. She is now going back to school, I think, for medical billing. And for her, the big piece was just having the safety of knowing where she could be safe in a home and have somewhere to sleep.
You'll see some other communications coming up for the program. This Sunday, we'll have a piece in the paper that'll highlight a couple of other tenants. And we just are reaching out to the chair to participate in one of our steering committee meetings. And we'd like to invite each of you, if you'd like a deeper dive, a separate meeting with us, that we'd be very pleased to do that. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much. Before I go to questions, I just want to get a sense from the audience. How many members of the audience plan on engaging in final audience participation? I see one. If you're behind the column, I don't see you. Okay, so one person. Thank you. All right, any questions for United Way? All right, I'm not seeing any. Well, thank you so much for the update. Okay, so then I guess question for the coalition. Can we sufficiently cover the gap analysis in the time? Okay, then let's do it. No, thank you. Just for fun.
All right. Meg Zalatel, Anchorage Coalition and Homelessness. This is the proposed gap analysis. It's required every year to be done by HUD. It goes before the Advisory Council, which is the COC governance, tomorrow. And if approved, this will be it for the year. So we've done it. You'll see it's a little bit different this year than in previous years. So we did a gap with regard to year-round permanent capacity for shelter and transitional housing. Transitional housing is shelter as defined by HUD. So for permanent year-round capacity, we're looking at a need of about 210 for all single adults. Families is at 2, and youth and transitional aged youth are 61. And this is a look back over the past year. That families number is probably artificially low. As we explained in discussing the need for outreach, there wasn't outreach targeted towards families or specifically in intersecting with families who are unsheltered. So we expect to refine that number as we move through, particularly this next summer, where we do see a number of unsheltered families, particularly living in cars. Now, you may feel like that number is low given the current utilization in shelter, especially emergency cold weather shelter. But the idea here is a balance. Where do we invest our resources for the immediate needs and against the solution? So turning to the solution, which is housing, you'll see a total need of housing units at 2,478. That is a lot of housing units. It's broken down there by rapid rehousing. So rapid rehousing is a rental subsidy and some lighter touch case management. Supportive housing, anything from basically permanent supportive housing, but I think you'll see that refined along a spectrum over the year as we talk about new ways to do different types of supportive housing, and then independent units. That is a new category this year. What we know is there are a number of individuals who are experiencing homelessness who need to just start with a unit. They may have services otherwise through other means. They may have substance misuse services or behavioral health services, but they don't need necessarily housing related services. You'll see the veterans column is empty, and that's because the veterans are all calculated into the single adult or families number. They're either a part of a family or they're a single adult. So that's the snapshot. I think what it tells us is we have a long road ahead. 2,400 housing units is a lot of housing units, but that each housing unit we bring on and can support brings down those numbers, and that the shelter need, I don't think should feel surprising. If you think about the current year-round permanent capacity we have, it's Downtown Hope Center, Gospel Rescue Mission, and Brother Francis Shelter. So the idea that one more shelter at approximately the size of Brother Francis is needed, I don't believe should feel surprising. Happy to take any questions. Our hope is to turn this into a dashboard and have it become a more iterative process throughout the year coming up.
Great, thank you. Just want to note for the record, we've been joined by Ms. Quinn Davidson. Yeah, I appreciate you sending this forward. I'm definitely going to want to mull over this a little bit and probably send you more detailed questions. But the first question I guess I have is, I'm a little bit surprised by the youth and transitional age youth shelter number. Can you just explain? I mean, I honestly thought that would be lower. So can you just help explain that?
So that comes out of what we've seen for the utilization. So as Covenant House shifted its model, what we had was the ability to get much better data around youth and transitional age youth. And what we've seen is they've been at capacity. And then that coupled with their outreach is what's driving this number. That 18 to 24-year-old sector has really grown, or we've identified them and we have their data. It's one of those two factors.
So is it safe to say then, because I assume when you do youth and transitional age youth, that's two different age categories. So is it safe to say then that the majority of that 61 is in that latter older category?
Yes. So transition age youth starts at 18. We haven't heard about capacity constraints right now from Covenant House in their youth shelter.
Got it. That's helpful. All right. We have time for maybe like one or two questions, brief if you have them. Otherwise, I would invite folks to reach out to ACH offline.
I just have a comment.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm just, I really love the idea that we're getting down to, if we're successful, this principle that we might need one more shelter of 130 people. You know, when we finally do have a distributed model where the human capacity, the human level it's not institutional level, that's when we're going to win this game.
And I should add that year-round permanent capacity, the assumption is low barrier, but the assumption does not have to be congregate shelter versus non-congregate shelter. And in fact, if we look at the best practices and the trends with regard to shelter, most is moving towards a non-congregate model, which really brings us much closer to that transitional housing, and hence why they're grouped together, because they're still not permanent solutions, but much more stabilizing and transitional or non-congregate.
Great. Thanks.
Well, I would
Oh,
say just lastly that, and way less offsite impacts surrounding neighborhoods with suffering and trauma that they're having to put up with our 500 and 600 people circulating in the Sullivan Arena. You know, it was argued yesterday that the assault that happened was by somebody who wasn't receiving care and service at the arena. And that is literally the fear and argument that the neighbors are making, is that it is an attraction. The vulnerable people draw in the predators. And at that scale, it's impossible to manage that level. So anyhow, this is the vision we've been working on for a number of years, and we're getting to the point now where we can see the numbers, and I think that's brilliant, and I'm grateful.
Thank you. All right, with that, I'm going to go ahead and move us on in our agenda to final audience participation. I understand we have one individual to speak, so if you can come up, if you can get a mic, make sure it's on, and then I have a timer for 3 minutes. I'm going to start when you start speaking. Welcome.
My name is Matthew Philpott. I'm the compliance officer for Henning. I'd like to speak on a few subjects. First, you guys had some questions regarding our last week that we were able to touch on. Mr. Cross had concerns regarding Ford adjacent properties and also residents. We've gone around knocking on doors. I'd like to say that I'd like to applaud Fairview, and they showed some amazing resolve. They're understandably frustrated, but they see the light at the end of the tunnel, and so I think they deserve a round of applause. We've stepped up measures as far as patrols on the outside. They've increased patrols, expanding it to the borders of the hockey ring. We sat down with, or the ice skating ring. We sat down with them as well, along with going over to the dealership. Being said, the incident that happened yesterday, if you'd like to ask about that, I'll forward that, but I need some more time on that. Before my time's up, I would like to refute Duke's claim, with all due respect. Meals are being prepared. Meals are being served. I operate under the thought process paradigm of objective thinking, which means I don't speculate. I don't. If I don't see it, I don't say it. If it's fact, that's when I operate on it. If I don't know it, then I investigate. Right now, we are within compliance. Right now, we have all bunks are full. We have approximately 43 people in warming shelter, with a ratio of 1 to 18.5. We are serving 3 meals per day. Duke services are welcome. They're appreciated. He and I had a long discussion about it, and so I welcome him back. I think it's a great thing. That being said, we've increased safety at the front. We do not have security. As he's noted, we do not have security. We have safety. The altercation that happened yesterday, I'd like to speak on that if you guys would give me additional time.
I would suggest you be very careful about that right now, because it's an open and active investigation.
Sir, that's why I agree that I don't think we should speculate. I do not think we should speculate that the person was not one of our residents.
And
I
it may
think
or
we
may
should
not be.
comment on it as well.
Yeah.
I think it sends out a false narrative, so that the person was not in care. And I can say right now, out of respect for the investigation, we should not be talking about it.
Well, you should not be talking about it.
Okay.
That is a fact, but this body is in fact empowered to talk about those things, and it is our desire to ensure the safety of the neighbors of the environment. So I would recommend you don't.
Okay. I don't know how long it's been since you guys have been down to the shelter, but I'd welcome you down there so you can see the 3 meals being served. I'm not sure when the last time was, but please come down. I haven't seen you guys there. I spend 12 hours a day there. So please come down. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, with that, I'm going to go ahead and adjourn this meeting.